The mist clung tightly to the River Ouse in the twilight of 1845, transforming the English countryside into a watercolor painting of greys and greens. Willows dipped their branches into the water, their leaves creating ripples across the glassy surface. Swallows darted through the humid air, their songs mixing with the gentle, rhythmic rush of the current downstream. Nature thrived along the riverbank, breathing life into the fading light of day. Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ravensdale, sat alone amidst this peaceful scene like a jagged scar upon the landscape. At 35, Sebastian was a terrifying sight to behold. He was vast and broad-shouldered, but he sat hunched over, his weight leaning heavily on a thick ebony cane. His dark hair was long and unkempt, shadowing a face that bore a silver line of scar tissue running from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a cannon blast that had taken more than just his skin. He had earned his reputation as the Mad Duke of the North. His estates were crumbling from neglect, his fortune untouched, his isolation absolute. Villagers crossed the street to avoid his limping gait. Society mothers whispered that he was a beast, a man whose soul had been left behind on the battlefields of Afghanistan. They whispered about the violence in his hands, the madness in his eyes. But tonight, the only violence Sebastian felt was the memory of gunfire that drowned out the quiet river. Tonight, his solitude was not a choice, but a prison. If you love tales of passion and courage, please subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know how far these stories travel. No, Sebastian rasped, the words scraping against a throat unused to speech. I am not your father. The boy, Leo, didn't recoil at the harshness of the tone. He merely frowned at the battered wooden boat in his small hands, then looked back up at the scarred giant towering over him. Mama said he was tall. And sad. You look sad. Sebastian felt a phantom ache in his chest, sharper than the shrapnel in his leg. He gripped his cane until his knuckles turned white. Come, he commanded, his voice low. The river is rising. I will take you to her. The walk back from the riverbank was a slow, agonizing procession. Sebastian's leg dragged through the mud, a heavy, rhythmic thud drag that usually sent children running in terror. But Leo simply shortened his stride to match the Duke's broken pace, chattering aimlessly about fish and currents, blissfully unaware he was walking beside the monster of Ravensdale. They emerged from the willow grove to find a cottage that looked as though a strong wind might topple it. The thatch was rotting, dark with moss, and the garden was a tangle of weeds choking out a few desperate vegetables. It was a place of survival, not living. Leo! The scream pierced the evening mist. A woman burst from the crooked door, her apron stained with soap and water, her hair escaping a fraying cap. She ran with the frantic energy of a mother who had woken to silence. She scooped the boy into her arms, burying her face in his neck, shaking with relief. I told you never to go near the water alone, she sobbed, checking his limbs, his face. I told you. She stopped. Her gaze lifted, landing on the dark figure looming by the gate. The color drained from her face so fast Sebastian thought she might faint. She pulled Leo behind her skirts, her body becoming a trembling shield. She knew who he was. Everyone knew. Your Grace, she whispered, the words trembling. She stared at the scar bisecting his face, the wild hair, the sheer size of him. She looked at him as if he were death itself come to collect. Sebastian hated the fear in her eyes, but he accepted it. It was what he deserved. He was at the river's edge, Sebastian said, his voice rough. The current is strong tonight. Keep him close. He turned to leave, desperate to retreat to the shadows of his empty estate, but a small voice stopped him. He's nice, Mama, Leo said, peeking around her dress. He looks like a soldier. Like Papa. The woman flinched. She looked at Sebastian again, really looked at him this time, seeing not just the beast, but the man leaning heavily on a cane, his eyes cast downward in shame. The terror in her posture softened into confusion. Thank you, Your Grace, she said softly. I don't know what I would have done if. I am Clara. Clara Miller. Sebastian froze. The name hit him harder than the cannonball had 5 years ago. The world tilted on its axis. The air left his lungs. Miller. He looked at the boy again, the shape of his jaw, the bright, intelligent eyes. He saw the ghost of a laughing sergeant, a man who had shoved Sebastian into a trench a split second before the world exploded. A man who had died so a duke could live to be a monster. Miller, Sebastian repeated, the name tasting like ash and blood. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't look at them. Without another word, he turned and limped away into the gathering dark, fleeing from the widow and the son of the man he had failed to save. The envelope in Sebastian's greatcoat pocket felt heavier than lead, heavier than the pistol he used to carry into battle. It contained £50, a fortune for a village seamstress, a pittance for a duke, and a woefully insufficient price for a man's life. He returned to the cottage under the grey light of morning, the mist clinging to his damp clothes. He didn't knock. He simply stood at the gate, gripping the wood until a splinter dug into his glove. When Clara emerged to hang wet linens on a sagging line, she didn't scream this time. She straightened, her hands red from the cold water, and watched him with wary eyes. Your Grace, she said, her voice steady but cool. Sebastian limped forward, pulling the thick envelope from his coat. He thrust it toward her, refusing to meet her gaze. For the boy, he gruffed, staring at a patch of moss on the thatch roof. A pension. From the estate. For services rendered by your husband. It was a lie. The army had stopped paying pensions years ago, and Sergeant Miller had never worked for the Ravensdale estate. He had worked for the Queen, and died for Sebastian. Clara looked at the money, then up at his scarred face. She didn't take it. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed her arms. My husband was a soldier, Your Grace, not a tenant. And the army sent their condolences and £5 4 years ago. I am a seamstress. I earn my bread. I do not take arms. It is not arms, Sebastian snapped, the rejection stinging his pride. It is. Guilt, she suggested softly. The word hung in the damp air. Sebastian flinched. The pain in his leg flared, a sharp, hot line of fire shooting up his hip, and he swayed. The world went grey at the edges. He stumbled, catching himself heavily on his cane, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. Clara's resolve vanished. In a heartbeat, she was at his side, her hand hovering near his elbow but not daring to touch. You are in pain, she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. Come inside. You cannot walk back like this. I am fine, he gritted out. You are grey as the river, she countered. Sit. Please. She led him not to the door, but to a rough wooden bench beneath the eaves, sheltered from the wind. Sebastian sank onto it, his leg trembling uncontrollably now that the weight was off it. He closed his eyes, waiting for the shame to swallow him whole. A moment later, the rattle of china broke the silence. Clara returned with a chipped cup, steam rising from it in curling ribbons. It is only tea, she said. We have no sugar. Sebastian reached for it. He commanded his hand to be steady, to be the iron hand of the Duke, the steel hand of the commander. But his body betrayed him. His hand shook violently, a tremor born of nerve damage and nightmares. The cup clattered against the saucer, tea sloshing over the rim, scalding his fingers. He froze, waiting for the pity, waiting for her to look away, to laugh, to revulsion. She didn't. Clara reached out and steadied the saucer with her own rough, warm hand, holding it until his tremor subsided enough to grip the cup. She looked directly into his eyes, seeing the man beneath the wreckage. Drink, she whispered. The cold gets into the bones here. You must keep it out. Sebastian didn't return the next day with the envelope. The rejection of his gold still burned, but the image of the rotting garden gate, hanging off its hinges like a broken limb, burned hotter. It was a vulnerability, a breach in the perimeter. He arrived at dawn, his horse laden not with saddlebags of coin, but with seasoned oak planks and a heavy iron box of tools salvaged from the Ravensdale stables. He didn't ask for permission. He simply removed his greatcoat, rolled up his sleeves to reveal the map of scars on his forearms, and set to work. The labor was brutal. Every time he bent to measure a plank, his bad legs screamed in protest, a jagged rhythm of agony that usually sent him reaching for laudanum. But today, the pain was different. It was clean. It was the pain of creation, not destruction. "You're doing it wrong." Sebastian paused, the hammer hovering over a nail. He looked down to see Leo standing in the tall grass, holding a rock. "Am I?" Sebastian asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Papa fixed the chicken coop once," Leo said seriously, stepping closer. "He said you have to hold the nail straight, or it goes crooked." Sebastian looked at the nail. It was, indeed, slightly tilted. "Your papa was a wise man." "I can hold it," Leo offered. Sebastian hesitated. His hands were large, scarred, and capable of crushing violence. The boy's fingers were tiny, fragile stems of bone and skin. "It is dangerous," Sebastian warned. "I'm not scared," Leo said, dropping the rock and reaching for a nail. "You're a soldier. Soldiers protect people. You won't hit me." The trust in the boy's voice hit Sebastian with the force of a physical blow. "You won't hit me." He took a breath, the air smelling of sawdust and damp earth, and nodded. For the next hour, they worked in a companionable rhythm. The Duke of Ravensdale, kneeling in the mud, and the sergeant's son, passing him nails. There was no pity here. No whispers of the mad duke. Just the simple, honest physics of wood and iron. When the last plank was secured, Sebastian tested the gate. It swung shut with a solid, satisfying thunk. The perimeter was secure. The rot was gone. He stood up, wiping his dirty hands on his trousers, ignoring the fire in his hip. He looked at his hands, hands that had ended lives, hands that shook with tremors in the quiet of the night. Today, they hadn't shaken. Today, they had built a wall to keep the wolves out. Clara watched from the window, invisible behind the curtain, but Sebastian felt her gaze. He wasn't the monster haunting the riverbank anymore. He was the man standing guard at the gate. One moment, Sebastian was sitting by the hearth, watching Clara mend a tear in Leo's trousers, the domestic silence a balm to his frayed nerves. The next, the sky split open above the cottage, a white-hot flash followed by a ground-shaking boom. In the time it took for the lightning to fade, the cottage vanished. The smell of wood smoke was replaced by the acrid stench of sulfur and copper blood. The warmth of the fire became the scorching heat of the Khyber Pass. "Incoming!" Sebastian roared, the command ripping from his throat. He threw himself away from the window, crashing into the corner of the room. His cane clattered uselessly to the floor. He curled inward, pressing his hands over his ears, his eyes squeezed shut against the muzzle flashes. He was shaking, vibrating with the terrified adrenaline of a commander who knows his men are about to die. "Get down!" he gasped, waiting for the screams. "Miller, get down!" He couldn't breathe. The air was too thin, too full of dust. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird. He waited for the impact, for the searing pain of shrapnel, for the end. Then, a weight settled over his shoulders. It wasn't the heavy crushing weight of a collapsed trench. It was soft. It smelled of lavender and old wool. "It's okay," a small voice whispered. "It's just the sky booming. It can't hurt you inside." Sebastian opened one eye, his chest heaving. The ravine was gone. He was huddled on a rag rug in a dim room. Leo stood before him, tucking a patched quilt around Sebastian's trembling shoulders with solemn efficiency. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't running from the madman on the floor. He was tucking him in. Leo. Clara's voice came from somewhere above. It wasn't the shriek of a terrified woman. It was low, calm, an anchor in the storm. Step back, darling. Give him air. Clara knelt before him. She didn't reach out to touch him, didn't try to restrain him. She simply placed her hands flat on the floorboards, grounding herself, and looked at him. Look at the fire, Sebastian, she commanded softly. She didn't use his title. In the dirt and the dark, there were no titles. Look at the flame. Listen to the wood pop. You are in Yorkshire. You are in my kitchen. The war is over. Sebastian focused on the flicker of orange in the grate. He listened to the rain drumming on the thatch, not shrapnel, just rain. He took a ragged breath, the scent of sulfur fading into lavender. "Aye!" He choked, shame flooding him instantly. He tried to pull the blanket off, to stand, to apologize for the display of cowardice. "I am sorry. I should leave. I am." "You are human," Clara said, cutting him off. She picked up his cane and held it out, not as a weapon, but as a support. "And you are welcome here until the storm passes. We do not send soldiers out into the rain." Leo patted Sebastian's knee through the quilt. "The blanket keeps the loud noises out," the boy said confidently. "It works for me." Sebastian looked at the boy, then at the woman who refused to see a monster. He pulled the scratchy wool tighter around his shoulders, and for the first time in 5 years, he didn't try to run. The river was calm a week later, the violence of the storm forgotten by the water, if not by the man. The morning sun turned the Ouse into a ribbon of hammered gold. Sebastian sat on the bank, his bad legs stretched out stiffly before him, a bamboo pole resting easily in his hands. Beside him, Leo mimicked his posture with painful accuracy, frowning at the water with a seriousness that belonged in a war room, not a fishing trip. "Patience," Sebastian murmured, keeping his voice low so as not to spook the trout. "The fish does not know it is hungry until it sees the worm. You must wait for the mistake." "My arm hurts," Leo complained, though he didn't lower the pole. "Pain is instructive," Sebastian said automatically, then winced. It was a soldier's lesson, too harsh for a spring morning. He softened his tone. "Rest it on your knee. Like this." He guided the boy's small hands, adjusting his grip. The contact was easy now. The flinching had stopped, on both sides. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the gentle lap of water against the mud. "Does it hurt?" Leo asked suddenly. Sebastian didn't have to ask what he meant. The boy wasn't looking at the river anymore. He was staring at the thick, angry ridge of scar tissue that ran down Sebastian's neck, disappearing into his collar. Sebastian tightened his grip on the rod. He usually wore high collars, scarves, shadows. He hid the ruin of his face because he couldn't bear the revulsion. But Leo's eyes held only curiosity, the same way he looked at a beetle or a bird's nest. "Sometimes," Sebastian admitted. "When it rains. Or when I remember how I got it." "Did a dragon bite you?" A laugh startled Sebastian, a rusty sound that felt foreign in his chest. "No dragon. Just a very loud, very angry metal ball." "A cannon," Leo whispered, or coloring his voice. "Like in the stories." "Not like the stories," Sebastian corrected gently. "In the stories, the hero dodges. I did not dodge." Leo dropped his pole. He scrambled over the grass, ignoring the dirt staining his knees, and stood right in front of Sebastian. Before Sebastian could pull back, before he could turn his face away to hide the ugliness, Leo reached out. Small, cool fingers brushed against the jagged skin of his jaw. It was a touch lighter than a moth's wing. "It looks like a map," Leo decided, tracing the line upward. "And maps are for finding things." He dropped his hand and nodded decisively. "It doesn't mean you didn't dodge. It just means you didn't run away. That makes you brave." Sebastian froze. The air left his lungs. He had spent 5 years looking in the mirror and seeing a failure. A broken thing. A coward who lived when better men died. But this boy, this child of the man he failed, saw bravery. Taze pricked Sebastian's eyes, hot and sudden. He blinked them away, clearing his throat roughly. "The fish," he choked out, nodding at the bobber dipping frantically in the water. "You have a bite, Leo. Pull." Leo scrambled back to his pole, shrieking with delight as he reeled in a small, shimmering perch. But Sebastian didn't look at the fish. He looked at the reflection in the water, the scarred man sitting next to the laughing boy, and for the first time, he didn't hate what he saw. The roar of the river drowned out the thunder. It was a living thing, a beast of mud and debris tearing through the valley. Sebastian pulled ours to a halt at the ridge. The scene below stopped his heart. The cottage was gone, or mostly gone. The thatched roof was an island in a swirling brown sea. The garden, the fence he had built, the bench where he had drunk tea, all erased. And there, clinging to the chimney stack, were 2 small figures. "Hold on!" Sebastian screamed, though the wind tore the words from his mouth. He spurred the horse down the slope, mud flying, sliding dangerously close to the churning water. He couldn't ride to them. The current was too fast, too deep. He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. "Sebastian." Clara's voice was a thin, terrified thread in the cacophony. She was holding Leo with one arm, clinging to the brickwork with the other. The water was already lapping at their feet. The house groaned, shifting on its foundation. It wouldn't hold. Sebastian looked at the water. It was cold, dark, and violent. His leg throbbed in anticipation. He was a cripple. He was heavy. He would sink. "Coward," the ghost of Miller whispered. "Do you watch them die too?" Sebastian roared, a primal sound of defiance that matched the storm. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He stripped off his heavy coat and plunged into the flood. The cold hit him like a physical blow, seizing his lungs. The current grabbed him, spinning him around, smashing his bad hip against a floating log. Pain blinded him, white-hot and agonizing. He gasped, swallowing mouthfuls of gritty water. Swim. He kicked. He clawed at the water, fighting the river with the same savage desperation he had used to fight the Afghans. He wasn't a duke now. He wasn't a cripple. He was a force of will. He reached the roof just as the cottage gave a sickening lurch. He grabbed the eaves, his fingers digging into the rotting thatch, and hauled himself up. "Give him to me," Sebastian yelled, reaching for Leo. Clara didn't hesitate. She passed the boy into Sebastian's arms. Leo was sobbing, freezing, terrified. Sebastian strapped the boy to his back with his belt, securing him tight. "You next," he commanded Clara. "The roof is going," she screamed, pointing. The chimney was cracking. "Jump," Sebastian ordered. "I have you." They went into the water together. It was chaos. The river tried to eat them. Sebastian kicked with his good leg, his bad leg dragging like an anchor, but he refused to let go of Clara's hand. He fought the current, inch by agonizing inch, using the debris as leverage, using his rage as fuel. He felt the mud of the bank under his boots. He hauled them up, collapsing onto the grass, gasping, retching, alive. He rolled over, dragging Leo and Clara into a pile of shivering, muddy limbs. He checked their pulses, his hands shaking violently, not from palsy, but from adrenaline. They were breathing. They were safe. Sebastian threw his head back and laughed, a wild, broken sound of pure triumph. The numbness was gone. The ice in his veins had melted in the flood. He felt everything, the cold, the pain, the fear, the love. God help him, the love. The carriage that rolled up the overgrown drive of Ravensdale Manor was not the sort that belonged in the overgrown countryside. It was polished black lacquer, emblazoned with gold crests, and drawn by 4 white horses that looked cleaner than most of Sebastian's tenants. Sebastian watched from the library window as the Dowager Duchess of Ravensdale descended. She stepped onto the cracked pavement with the disdain of a queen entering a leper colony. He met her in the great hall. It was cold there. It was always cold in the manor, and the echo of her heels on the marble sounded like gunshots. "Look at you," she said by way of greeting, stripping off her kid gloves. Her eyes swept over his rough linen shirt, the mud on his boots, the lack of a cravat. "You look like a field hand. And I hear you have been acting like one." "Mother," Sebastian said, leaning on his cane. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Do not play coy with me, Sebastian. The rumors have reached London. The Duke of Ravensdale, playing carpenter for a washerwoman. A sergeant's widow." She spat the words as if they were a disease. "Have you lost your mind entirely? Or just your dignity?" "I am repairing a fence," he said tightly. "And her name is Mrs. Miller. Her name is irrelevant. Her station is what matters. You are a duke. You have a lineage to protect, an estate to salvage. We have an arrangement with the Earl of Carlisle's daughter. She brings £20,000 a year. That is what saves this house, Sebastian. Not playing father to a pauper's brat." Sebastian looked around the hall. He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the shrouded furniture, the portraits of dead ancestors who stared down with judging eyes. He thought of Clara's kitchen. It was small, cramped, and smelled of cabbage and soap. But it was warm. It was alive. This house was a mausoleum. And his mother was asking him to chain himself to it. "I do not care about the Earl's daughter," he said quietly. "Then care about her," his mother snapped, stepping closer. "Do you think you are helping this woman? You are a duke. She is nobody. If you continue this dalliance, society will not shun you, Sebastian. You are a man, you are titled. They will forgive you eventually. But they will destroy her. They will paint her as a whore who seduced a madman for his purse. Is that the protection you offer?" The words struck him like a physical blow. He had thought he was shielding them. He had thought the fence, the money, the presence was protection. But he was the danger. His very shadow was a blight that would wither Clara's reputation just as surely as the war had withered his soul. "Leave," Sebastian whispered. "I will leave when you come to your senses." "Get out," he roared, the sound echoing off the cold stone walls. When the carriage finally rattled away, Sebastian stood alone in the silence. He looked at his hands, hands that broke everything they touched. He couldn't save Miller. He couldn't save his men. And if he stayed, he wouldn't save Clara. He turned away from the window, away from the direction of the river. He retreated into the dark of the library and locked the door. He would protect them the only way he knew how, by disappearing again. For 7 days, Sebastian drank. It wasn't the social sipping of the aristocracy. It was the grim, determined drinking of a soldier trying to drown a memory. He sat in the darkened library, the curtains drawn against the spring sun, a bottle of brandy his only companion. He told himself he was noble. He told himself he was saving Clara from the stain of his name. But in the silence, the ghosts returned. Without Leo's chatter or Clara's quiet humming to chase them away, the library filled with the screams of dying men. The shadows in the corners morphed into Miller's bloody face, accusing him. "You left them," the ghost whispered. "Just like you left me." On the 7th night, the rain began. It wasn't a spring shower. It was a deluge, a biblical torrent that hammered against the glass like fists. The wind howled through the chimneys, a mournful, shrieking sound that made the manor groan. Sebastian stared into the dregs of his glass. The sound of the water was deafening. It reminded him of the river. The river. He sat up straight, the haze of alcohol clearing instantly. The Ouse had been high last week. The winter runoff combined with this storm. He shoved himself out of the chair, his bad leg buckling before he caught himself on the desk. He limped to the window and tore back the heavy velvet curtains. Outside, the world was black and chaotic. Lightning flashed, illuminating the valley below. It wasn't a valley anymore. It was a lake. The water had risen terrifyingly fast. The familiar winding ribbon of the Ouse had swollen into a raging, churning monster, swallowing the banks, the willows, the path. And the cottage. Sebastian's heart stopped. The cottage sat in the dip of the land. If the banks burst, they will destroy her, his mother had said. But nature didn't care about reputations. Nature simply devoured. No, he breathed. He didn't call for a servant. He didn't call for a stable hand. He grabbed his heavy oilskin coat and shoved his pistols into his belt, useless against water, but instinct drove him to be armed. He ran for the stables, his cane forgotten, ignoring the screaming agony in his hip. The black stallion, ours, rolled his eyes and reared as Sebastian threw open the stable doors, smelling the storm and the fear on his master. Easy, Sebastian growled, wrestling the saddle onto the beast's back with frantic strength. We have one more charge, old friend. Just one more. He mounted, kicking the horse into a gallop before they even cleared the yard. They thundered into the storm, plunging into the darkness toward the river, toward the woman and the boy who had taught him how to breathe, praying to a god he stopped believing in years ago that he wasn't too late. The roar of the river drowned out the thunder. It was a living thing, a beast of mud and debris tearing through the valley. Sebastian pulled ours to a halt at the ridge. The scene below stopped his heart. The cottage was gone, or mostly gone. The thatched roof was an island in a swirling brown sea. The garden, the fence he had built, the bench where he had drunk tea, all erased. And there, clinging to the chimney stack, were two small figures. "Hold on!" Sebastian screamed, though the wind tore the words from his mouth. He spurred the horse down the slope, mud flying, sliding dangerously close to the churning water. He couldn't ride to them. The current was too fast, too deep. He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. "Sebastian!" Clara's voice was a thin, terrified thread in the cacophony. She was holding Leo with one arm, clinging to the brickwork with the other. The water was already lapping at their feet. The house groaned, shifting on its foundation. It wouldn't hold. Sebastian looked at the water. It was cold, dark, and violent. His leg throbbed in anticipation. He was a cripple. He was heavy. He would sink. "Coward," the ghost of Miller whispered. "Do you watch them die too?" Sebastian roared, a primal sound of defiance that matched the storm. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He stripped off his heavy coat and plunged into the flood. The cold hit him like a physical blow, seizing his lungs. The current grabbed him, spinning him around, smashing his bad hip against a floating log. Pain blinded him, white-hot and agonizing. He gasped, swallowing mouthfuls of gritty water. Swim. He kicked. He clawed at the water, fighting the river with the same savage desperation he had used to fight the Afghans. He wasn't a duke now. He wasn't a cripple. He was a force of will. He reached the roof just as the cottage gave a sickening lurch. He grabbed the eaves, his fingers digging into the rotting thatch, and hauled himself up. "Give him to me," Sebastian yelled, reaching for Leo. Clara didn't hesitate. She passed the boy into Sebastian's arms. Leo was sobbing, freezing, terrified. Sebastian strapped the boy to his back with his belt, securing him tight. "You next," he commanded Clara. "The roof is going," she screamed, pointing. The chimney was cracking. "Jump," Sebastian ordered. "I have you." They went into the water together. It was chaos. The river tried to eat them. Sebastian kicked with his good leg, his bad leg dragging like an anchor, but he refused to let go of Clara's hand. He fought the current, inch by agonizing inch, using the debris as leverage, using his rage as fuel. He felt the mud of the bank under his boots. He hauled them up, collapsing onto the grass, gasping, retching, alive. He rolled over, dragging Leo and Clara into a pile of shivering, muddy limbs. He checked their pulses, his hands shaking violently, not from palsy, but from adrenaline. They were breathing. They were safe. Sebastian threw his head back and laughed, a wild, broken sound of pure triumph. The numbness was gone. The ice in his veins had melted in the flood. He felt everything: the cold, the pain, the fear, the love. God help him, the love. The great hall of Ravensdale Manor was finally warm. A massive fire roared in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the 3 shivering figures wrapped in blankets. Sebastian paced before the fire, his limp pronounced, his hair drying in wild tangles. Clara sat in the armchair, holding a sleeping Leo. She watched Sebastian with a gaze that stripped him bare. "You saved us," she said softly. "You came back." "I had to," Sebastian said, stopping to stare into the flames. "I couldn't let it happen again." Clara tilted her head. Again. The moment had come. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the truth. Sebastian turned to face her. He looked terrified, more terrified than he had been in the river. "I am the Duke of Ravensdale," he began, his voice cracking. "But 5 years ago, I was Colonel Blackwood. I commanded the 4th Regiment." Clara went still. "I gave the order," Sebastian whispered. "We were pinned down. I ordered the charge. I sent them into the ravine. I sent Sergeant Miller into the ravine." He squeezed his eyes shut. "He pushed me into a trench when the shelling started. He took the blast meant for me. I am living on his stolen time, Clara. I killed your husband." He waited for the scream. He waited for her to spit on him, to take her son and flee the house of the murderer. "I know," Clara said. Sebastian's eyes snapped open. "What?" "I know you were his commander. Miller wrote to me. Every week." She shifted Leo gently, reaching into the pocket of her sodden dress to touch something that wasn't there, a phantom letter. He wrote about the cold, the hunger, and he wrote about Colonel Blackwood. She stood up, walking toward him. She didn't look angry. She looked sad and weary and infinitely kind. "He wrote that you gave your rations to the private who lost his boots. He wrote that you sat watch when the men were too exhausted to keep their eyes open. He wrote." Her voice trembled. "He wrote, 'If I fall, Clara, do not blame the Colonel. He carries the weight of all of us. He is a good man in a bad war.'" Sebastian fell to his knees. The sob ripped out of him, a guttural sound of 5 years of agony finally finding a release. He buried his face in his hands, weeping like a child, like a broken man finally allowed to heal. Clara knelt before him. She pulled his hands away from his face and kissed his scarred cheek. "He saved you, Sebastian. Do not waste the life he gave you by hating it." 2 years later, the summer sun turned the river Ouse into a ribbon of light. The willows were green and lush, the scars of the flood healed over by wildflowers. "Higher, Papa. Throw it higher." Sebastian laughed, hoisting the 8-year-old boy onto his shoulders. His legs still stiffened in the damp, and the scar on his face was still silver and stark, but he didn't hide it anymore. He wore it like the map Leo said it was. "Ready?" Sebastian asked. "Ready." Leo tossed the wreath of white daisies into the gentle current. They watched it drift downstream, bobbing peacefully toward the sea. It wasn't a funeral procession. It was a greeting. "Do you think he sees it?" Leo asked. Clara stepped up beside them, slipping her hand into Sebastian's. Her thumb brushed over his wedding ring. "I think he sees everything," she said, leaning her head on Sebastian's shoulder. "And I think he is glad." Sebastian looked at the river. It was no longer the place where he went to hide from the world. It was the place where the world had found him. "Come," Sebastian said, turning them away from the water. "Let's go home. The tea is getting cold." They walked back toward the manor, no longer a cold mausoleum, but but a home filled with light, noise, and the chaotic joy of a family built from the wreckage, stronger for having been broken. A new story awaits you on the screen right now. Click it to discover another world of passion, heart, and unforgettable courage.